When I share that I accept late assignments from my students without penalty, two of the most common reactions I get are: one, what about the teacher's time? Why don't we care about them? And two, we must teach the student a lesson by giving them the zero. Now, in order to have this conversation reasonably, we first need to step back from black and white thinking in absolutes. For example, at no point did I ever claim that I will infinitely accept a late assignment, like a year later, for example. And two, the suggestion is not that everyone else should do it or that late penalties of any kind are never appropriate. So in service of this conversation, I'm going to share a real-life example, in fact, the most common example that shows up in my classroom. A paper is due, let's say Friday at midnight, and the student turns it in at 7 or 8 in the morning the next day, or maybe 1 or 2 days later. In terms of teachers' time, it doesn't really matter to me whether or not they turn it in a few hours late or even a day or two late, because I'm not reading the paper the moment it's due. And that doesn't matter if I change the due date, by the way. If the due date is Monday, I'm still not reading the paper the moment it's due because I got other things to do on my checklist. And even if by some miracle I've scheduled the due date exactly when I'm going to start reading the papers, I have other papers to read, and the student almost invariably submits the paper before I'm done with the others anyway. And in terms of some lesson being taught by not accepting a paper because they finished it a few hours later than their peers, I don't agree with that being a valuable lesson either. Maybe you decide that some small late penalty that is appropriate and connected to the assignment is warranted. But simply saying no does not align with the vast majority of life experience. So what is the lesson being taught? Most importantly, when there is a consequence, let's say late points or a zero for some reason, the setting, the context, that's what matters. Because that's the fundamental difference between punishment and consequence. It's not the action itself, but the emotional and meaningful connection to whatever is happening. If the only message is, I must comply or you will harm me, that's punishment. But if the message instead is, I connect to the underlying meaning and value of what's happening, now we're back into consequence territory. Hope that helps.